All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. This is a Zoom debate between the two Democrats running for the US Senate. The winner of the Democratic primary on May 17th will face four-term Republican Senator Mike Crapo in November. This debate is sponsored by the Idaho Women for Biden-Harris Facebook group, a bipartisan community of more than 10,000 Idaho women. Logistical support is provided by the Idaho Democratic Party. I'm Michelle Hicks, and I'll be your moderator for tonight's debate. Before I introduce the candidates, there are a few rules that we want to share with everyone. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to make an opening statement. The order was determined in advance by a flip of a coin. All of tonight's questions were submitted by Idaho voters. 2 days ago, the candidates were provided with the questions selected for tonight's forum. Both candidates will have an opportunity to answer each question, and each candidate will have a minute in which to answer. If I consider an answer unclear or unresponsive, I do have moderator's discretion to ask a clarifying question. I'll also note that we have many questions to get to this evening, so if I feel a question on a similar topic has already been addressed, I may move forward and onto another topic. At the end of the debate, each candidate will then have 2 minutes to make a closing statement. This forum will be recorded, and the recording will be available to watch on the Idaho Democratic Party's website early next week. Now, I'd like to introduce you to the candidates. Ben Persley is a fifth-generation Idahoan. He comes from a family of miners and loggers. He is an avid outdoorsman who spent much of his childhood fishing, bow hunting, river rafting, mountain biking, and hiking in the Idaho backcountry. In his 20s, Ben was a food service worker. In his 30s, he taught music and history in the Treasure Valley schools and performed in local bands. He's currently the owner of a commercial real estate investment and development company, and Ben is the father of 3 adult children. David Roth grew up in Idaho Falls and has been politically active since 2006. In 2020, David ran for the Idaho State Legislature and recently chaired the Bonneville Democrats. He is the executive director of the Bonneville Youth Development Council and treasurer of Community Coalitions of Idaho. Both agencies seek to reduce substance use among youth. David also serves on the board of the Idaho Falls affiliate of Habitat for Humanity and the Idaho Falls Soup Kitchen. David is the father of 2 adopted sons. As I just mentioned before tonight's debate, we had a coin toss and David Roth was the winner, and he has chosen to speak first. So David, over to you for your opening statement. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Idaho Women for Biden and Harris, and of course the Idaho Democrats, for presenting this debate. I'd also like to thank our moderator, Michelle Hicks, of course the voters of Idaho for engaging, and Ben for agreeing to participate tonight. I'm disappointed that our current elected officials aren't interested in addressing the issues that we in Idaho are facing every day. The epidemic, I've seen firsthand devastation in our communities. As a member of our community board, I've an increasing need for hardworking families to access the services that we provide. I'm proud to be part of the board who developed an innovative solution for workforce housing in Habitat for Humanity's Communities of Hope project. As a single father of 2 children whom I adopted from foster care, I understand the struggles that today's families face. And I've served in various capacities with the Democratic Party, including as a county chair and state legislative candidate. I've built deep relationships with Democratic leaders across the state, including Richard Stallings, who has endorsed me in this race. Every day I speak with Idahoans, and I understand the frustration that many feel with a government that's out of touch and doesn't listen. This is why I'm running for the United States Senate. I believe that Idahoans face real problems and they deserve real solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Ben, over to you. You have 2 minutes.
Yes, and thank you to everybody who's joining us on this call. I'm honored and privileged to be a part of this pursuit and a part of this Democratic Party. I'd like to thank everybody who brought this together, including moderator Michelle Hicks and the hardworking folks at the Idaho Democratic Party for coordinating all the logistics, and the Idaho Women for Biden-Harris Facebook for sponsoring this event. And in particular, I'd like to thank you, David, my opponent, for helping make this happen. My name is Ben Pursley. I'm a 5th generation Idahoan from a family of loggers and miners in the Panhandle region. And I grew up in the Treasure Valley, spending much of my life exploring the state's incredible public lands, backcountry, hunting and fishing opportunities with my family throughout the years. I've worked in the food service industry, as Michelle said, then spent many years as an educator and musician throughout the valley, teaching our youth in public schools, charter schools, and private schools. And now I run a successful commercial real estate and development company. I'm a father and active community member dedicated to service and expanding the opportunities that we have for access to public lands and engagement in our education system. I'm running for US Senate because Idaho needs change. Senator Crapo has been in Washington, D.C. for nearly a quarter of a century, 37 years on the taxpayer payroll. Idahoans from both sides of the aisle agree that politicians become disconnected with their constituents when they spend too long in Washington. We need to change that. It's time now for change. It's also time for decency. In the days following the attempted insurrection, this country was in need of accountability. But when it was time for the Senate to provide that accountability, Senator Crapo joined many of his colleagues and voted not guilty after the President of the United States sent a riotous mob to the Capitol in an attempt to overturn a free and fair election, as many of you well know. The poor decision-making that happens when people spend too much time in Washington, D.C. is something that I want to address and that we need to change. We need a fresh face and a new perspective, one that is focused on Idaho. I will be that change. I am Ben Pursley, and I ask for your vote.
Thank you, Ben. And I probably should remind our candidates that at 10 seconds to wrap up time, I'm going to hold up a yellow sign. And when your time is up, I will hold up a red sign. You may also hear that alarm go off as well. So our first question tonight is going to be for David, and it is on constituent services. David, one of the most important things a senator can do is help constituents resolve issues with federal agencies. What experience do you have that would enable you to provide outstanding service to constituents? You have 1 minute.
Thank you. Constituent service is a huge part of not only our campaign, but my daily life. I run an organization that's primarily funded by the federal government. And so every day I have to help people navigate the complex funding through the CDC, SAMHSA, Medicare, Medicaid, all of the different federal agencies that many of our constituents try to navigate every day. In addition, as the treasurer for a statewide organization, I help people all over the state navigate those issues already. And as a board member for Habitat for Humanity, we recently were awarded a $3 million grant from HUD. And so navigating those issues as well as we work through it. So I have a lot of experience. And in fact, we've already been providing constituent services. Since we launched the campaign early in March, people have been calling us and we've been helping solve their problems. So thank you.
Thank you. And Ben, same question to you.
Yeah,
resolving constituent services. Yes.
Thank you, Michelle. As a president of Horizon Hills Homeowners Association here at the base of the foothills in Boise, I worked recently with the city of Boise and Ridge to Rivers across various parties in a complex situation, looking for solutions that bridge private property ownership rights, a variety of different easement mechanisms for public access and mixed use, including grazing rights and rancher access, where there were public trails and people both on mountain bikes, horseback, and walking trails. This is in partnership with Parks and Rec and their stewardship and maintenance of these trails. And this highlights how working across multiple jurisdictions and agencies is able to be of a benefit to multiple parties and the amenities so dear to the citizens and our extended community here in the Treasure Valley.
Very good. Thank you. Our next question, how will you work to keep your Idaho constituents informed on what the Senate is working on and dispelling misinformation with facts, whether we like them or not? And Ben, I'll let you take this one first.
Yes, I am committed to being on the ground in Idaho, meeting with constituents throughout the state and frequent in-person town halls. Idahoans need a leader who will make time for them and listen to their concerns and have a good ear here with them. I would maximize social media and other technologies to engage and connect with our constituents as well as our youth, and use that as a way to give feedback through development of app and quick turnaround for real response from me and my team. I would point voters to the idea that they can get more educated on what their elected officials and representatives in Washington are doing by turning to a great website called votesmart.org that I utilize regularly and have for many years.
Very good. Thank you. David?
Yes. So once again, we've already been working with constituents on a daily basis. So trying to keep people informed. We've built a very large social media following, and it's continuing to grow every day. I think with many people, that's a great way to keep informed. I also would do town halls throughout the state regularly. We've been visiting counties all across the state as part of the campaign, and we would continue to do that. I also would make sure that my staff was always available to work with the organizations on the ground that are already reaching these particular groups of people, so that people had trusted resources on the ground already, in addition to my staff, to work with and reach out to. And I certainly would do everything in my power to make time for those who came all the way to Washington, D.C. During a time of session. We recently had a group of youth go to Washington, D.C., raise their money to get there, and our current senators couldn't find the time to talk to them. So I would make sure I have that level of availability all the time. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. We're going to move now to agriculture. Rural economies are suffering. David, how would you promote and build on the Biden administration's efforts to decentralize the meat processing industry and get more locally owned meat processing in the game?
Well, I come from about 5 or 6 generations of farmers, and so I understand the needs of agriculture really well. My father is a farmer, his father was a farmer, and one of the biggest issues for farmers is not having control of the processing of their products. So I think that more independent processing plants of meat and other products would be great. Biden has put forth a great plan that includes money in the USDA for funding to support these issues. So there will be grants and loans available to help meat processing plants and other agricultural organizations come online, so we can decentralize and make it so that we don't have a handful of companies controlling the majority of production. It's really about returning control and power back to the producers themselves. Thank you.
Very good. Ben?
Yes, I agree with the current administration's effort to mitigate the supply chain issues across various industries, and it has huge impact in Idaho, as David was describing, for farmers and obviously in the meatpacking industry. My intention would be to unpack some of these monopolies of the meat processing industry around the country. I would work cooperatively with local farmers and ranchers and support initiatives to provide some version of tax breaks for small businesses that use locally sourced meats, and incentives for schools to use locally sourced meat products, and increase financing options and develop small business concierge services. When I travel around the valley in Boise, most of the small businesses that I talk with, the number one interest they have is figuring out how to get their business started. And the big companies that come in have the advantage of having lawyers, accountants, and planners to get off the ground. And so they're looking for an opportunity to work with municipalities for their permitting process and get into doing what they do best, which is to run their business.
Thank you. Ben, this next question is for you. It's on Roe versus Wade. In the near future, the U.S. Supreme Court will decide a case that may overturn Roe v. Wade. The landmark case, which prohibited abortion bans before the point of fetal viability, or at about 6 months. Now, we all saw a leaked draft decision earlier this week, but Senator Amy Klobuchar has proposed legislation that would codify Roe v. Wade and make it federal law. Would you be in favor of such legislation?
Yeah, it's staggering that we're even talking about this, but I absolutely would support Senator Klobuchar's legislation to codify Roe v. Wade. Certainly is a very important issue around the country and to many, many Idahoans. It's staggering that we're revisiting this after 50 years. And when you go back to the fundamentals of Roe v. Wade being the right to privacy and the fundamentals of at least half of our population in women and their right to privacy to make decisions in private with their doctor about their body and their internal organs seems like the foundation of a free and fair democracy. So abortion needs to be safe, it needs to be legal, it needs to be affordable, it needs to be accessible.
Thank you. David?
I would absolutely agree that we need to move forward with legislation to codify Roe v. Wade. The right to privacy, the right for a woman to make choices about her body is fundamental as far as I'm concerned, and the majority of Americans. I believe there's support for it across America, and we just need to bring a majority of our politicians together to actually make this happen. And so I very much support that. In the meantime, if I could use my podium here for a second, there's a lot of women out there who are really concerned, really scared right now. And so I would encourage you to look at resources that are available right now, such as Legal Voice. Follow Legal Voice or Chelsea Gowana Lincoln on Twitter. They're putting out resources of how you can get involved right now, because we shouldn't wait until November to move forward with this. We should be pressuring our legislators now to move forward. We should be organizing and moving forward now. So I would encourage you to look to those resources.
Thank you. We're going to change topics and move on to the economy. And David, this next question is for you. In March, President Biden proposed the billionaire minimum income tax that would require the wealthiest Americans to pay at least 20% on all income. Now, currently, billionaires pay an average of only 8.2% of their income, according to the White House. Do you support this proposal? Why or why not?
I absolutely support this proposal. For years, billionaires have exploited tax loopholes to pay an effective tax rate significantly lower than many other Americans have paid. Often you see the examples in real estate development where we saw the Trump tax cuts giving millions of dollars in tax cuts to real estate developers, while the rest of us saw very little impact overall. These companies have built their profits taking advantage of the fact that there are social services out there that will help pick up the slack so they can exploit the low wages. And we've all been picking up the paycheck for that. So it's important that they're paying their fair share and no longer are exploiting the rest of us to pay for those social services that the people have to take advantage of simply because they're working in low wage jobs. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Yes, as well, I agree that billionaires should pay more and more than their fair share in this case. Simplifying our tax policy to benefit hardworking middle-income earners is a foundation of why I'm running in this campaign for U.S. Senate. It's a critical piece of the future of democracy is that we grow our middle class. And we've gone from in the last 40 years where our population was about 62% of our population was in the middle class, and it shrunk down below 50%. That can't be good for democracy to survive. Right now, and similar as David's saying, the highest income earners are getting most of the benefit at the tax policy level of federal government. And we've got to change that. We've got to get in there and make change for middle income earners to be able to have the biggest and strongest benefits from our tax policy.
Thank you. Ben, to you. Most economists agree that Americans are economically better off now than they were before the COVID-19 pandemic, and household income is up, as is household spending, even when accounting for inflation. But even though the economy is improving, many Americans don't yet feel that improvement, largely because of inflation, and especially because of the price at the pump. What can the Senate do to alleviate the pain of inflation?
Yeah, some of it has to do with getting involved in supply chain issues. There are issues with inflation tied to both individual and national debt that continue to go up. One of the biggest influxes or influences on inflation is the large tax breaks that we gave to the wealthy. So somewhere in the middle of that, we've got to find out how to mitigate our debt by being fiscally responsible. We've got to find a way that we work with various people to increase living wages so that people can afford, what's happening in the local economy. We've got to work as a federal government. We've got to work with state and local municipalities to try and find a solution to growth and the problems that causes for existing residents as well as people that are in that middle income earner.
Thank you. Ben, or excuse me, David, it's your turn.
No problem. Honestly, when you look at our biggest drivers, you are correct. It's fuel, housing, and the cost just of energy in general. And so what we need to do, first of all, prior to the beginning of the year, these big oil companies were actually saying in their earnings calls that they could use inflation as a cover to gouge consumers, to increase prices higher than what was needed. So the first thing that we need is a windfall tax on those huge gains that the oil companies have done to try to force them to actually only charge reasonable profits and let some of that money to let the fuel costs go back down to where they need to be. Second, we need to encourage and incentivize these companies to put their prices where they need to be and also look at the production. Often they control the amount of production because they want to get the highest price. The United States is the largest exporter of oil, producer of oil and exporter of oil. There's no reason why we shouldn't have enough here to have reasonable prices.
Thank you. And David, the next question will be on Medicare and Social Security. What will you do to protect and strengthen Medicare and Social Security?
So the first thing that we need to do is make sure that they have the funding that they need to continue. So I would take some of the money from the windfall tax that I just described, as well as the billionaire tax we talked about earlier, and dedicate that specifically to shore up Social Security and Medicare. Second, we know that Medicare costs are continuing to go up, and at the rate that they are increasing, they will eclipse our gross domestic product. That simply can't work. So we need to give more power to Medicare to be able to negotiate for prescription drug prices, and we need to give them more power to negotiate those costs of healthcare down. Too many people too many corporations and other companies are taking advantage of loopholes that allow them to exploit Medicare.
Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, and certainly with both Medicare and Social Security, it's critical that we're able to fulfill the promises that we've made to Idahoans and Americans on all fronts, but including Social Security to our seniors. This is essential for the service and the work they've done throughout their lives. And Medicare expansion that recently was enlisted in Idaho really helped families here. So Medicare expansion and opportunities for people to lower the overall impact of healthcare costs to their family is essential and critical to the well-being of our society. So I would work tirelessly to find any solutions that expand Medicare and give opportunities for families to be able to afford the prescription drug prices that they're suffering with right now, and access to affordable and quality healthcare.
Thank you. We are shifting now to education. David, this next question is for you. Ben, this next question is for you. The education of our children is primarily the responsibility of state government and local school districts. What do you see as the role of federal government in public education?
It's a great question. In this state, we receive $1 billion of federal education funding from fiscal year 2023. Congress must continue to provide these funds, or that money will have to come from state or local funds, which translates into higher supplemental levies. And as of January, Idaho property owners will bankroll more than $218 million in supplemental levies. 3/4 of Idaho schools districts use this supplemental levies not for new construction, but for day-to-day operations. So imagine if $1 billion in federal funds disappeared. It's critical that as the U.S. Senate, we continue to fund to the states that need that support.
Very good. David?
Yes, absolutely. You know, it's important at the federal level I was an elementary school administrator for several years. And so I understand how funding for schools works and how you have to tie everything together. The thing that we miss, though, is that the federal government can provide money, but Idaho does have that constitutional authority or responsibility to fund education. We just came off a record surplus. That wasn't really a surplus, that was underfunding education. So I would like to see more money coming from the federal government, but tying that money as matching money with the state and saying, you have this money, you don't need to charge your property tax owners these supplemental levies. You have this money to put into your system. Don't send it out in tax breaks that predominantly affect the wealthiest of all Idahoans. Instead, invest it into your education system. And when you do that, we will provide more funds as well to match and augment those investments. Thank you.
Thank you. David, during the 2020 presidential campaign, Joe Biden promised to provide 2 years of free community college, but he removed that provision from his social safety net legislation. Do you support 2 years of free community college? If yes, what would you do to revive that proposal? And if not, why not?
I absolutely would. I spent much of my career in higher education administration, and I believe that community college plays a vital role in helping students decide what they want to do with their lives for their future careers. It's also much more cost effective than a traditional university might be. So we definitely need to revive that. And I'd also like to expand that to see more funding for trade training as well and vocational training, because college is not necessarily the option for everyone. And we've created kind of a stigma that says if you don't go to college, you can't have a meaningful career. So I'd like to see at the same time that we're increasing and offering universal access to community college, that we're also funding and supporting those other training programs. And I would introduce legislation to do so.
Thank you. Ben?
Yes, I agree with David on maybe all three fronts. I would support Joe Biden's proposal for free community college. Obviously, the expansion of trade schools and what that means for our local economies is essential. And so I agree with David on that side of things. Certainly, if you can provide for the community college for 2 years, you're going to increase the workforce and the educated workforce that businesses rely on. Another piece of this is trying to figure out the solution to the increasing and growing student debt. And so in conjunction with this, I'd like to see proposals, and I'd like to work with my colleagues in Washington to find a solution that mitigates student debt, and we find a solution over time that works for all parties involved.
Thank you. And for both candidates, we'll start with Ben. Could you please tell us about your educational background and experience? I was unable to find any mention of it on either of your web pages, says one of our Idahoans who submitted that question.
Yes, thank you. I worked my way through my kind of non-traditional approach to college. I attended College of Idaho in Caldwell, Idaho, with a focus on history back in the late 80s and early 90s. I then continued in the food service industry for a number of years before committing myself to studying and learning a lot about music and then teaching in schools, both music and history. In my 30s, with a young family, went back to school at Boise State and got a degree in philosophy with a music minor, and went on into commercial real estate, again, non-traditional. And I was able to apply a lot of my learning skills, both as a teacher and as a student in various aspects of my life, to commercial real estate, which is really numbers, communications, and business relationship building.
Thank you. Ben, or excuse me, David.
No problem. I have a bachelor's degree in business with an emphasis in marketing. And I'm currently, as if I didn't have enough stuff going on, I'm in my last class of my Master's of Science in Educational Administration and Leadership. Like I said, I was an elementary school administrator for a number of years. Currently, as you know, I work for a nonprofit throughout the state. Prior to that, I was an elementary school administrator. I did spend several years as a successful real estate agent. And then prior to that, my career was in higher education administration, mostly in compliance and marketing, helping students match with degrees that made sense for them and finding affordable options for those degrees at innovative schools such as Western Governors University or other innovative schools like Newmont, for example.
Very good. Thank you. This next question addresses legislative gridlock. And David, we will start with you. As the Senate's rules exist today, Republicans in the Senate still have the power to block every single progressive priority using a procedural tool called the filibuster, which requires at least a minimum of 60 votes to advance legislation. Would you vote to eliminate the filibuster?
Absolutely, I would. I feel that if the roles were reversed, the Republican Party would not hesitate to end the filibuster if it stood in the way of accomplishing what they were trying to accomplish. We've seen them time and time again throw tradition out the window, such as when Mitch McConnell sat for 11 months waiting on the Merrick Garland confirmation. So I think it's absolutely critical that we don't get stuck, hung up on these ideas, and instead we focus on bringing solutions to the table for the people that we represent. This idea that we can come to a compromise on every single situation, or we can come to agreement, only works if the other party is willing to come to the table in good faith. And as we've seen with the recent Supreme Court confirmations, they're not willing to come with good faith. In fact, they're willing to say, we won't vote for this simply because it was proposed by Democrats.
Very good. Ben?
Yes, I would vote to eliminate or modify the filibuster. The filibuster is the primary tool that obstructionist politicians are using to block legislation that is needed to improve the lives of all American families and Idahoans, including bills like the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, the Women's Health Protection Act, and bills that protect same-sex marriage, among others. The American people need government to be efficient, effective, ending the divisive bill blocking filibuster, which is allowing our elected representatives to go to Washington and then do nothing. We all deserve and need leaders that will work and vote on bills that benefit the hardworking middle-income Americans. I would also try to rally the various states and other Senate candidates so that we, as Democrats, make sure that we are regularly in the majority above 60 votes, so we can accomplish our goals a variety of ways.
Let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about that if we could, Ben. How would we get past partisan gridlock and restore some measure of bipartisanship?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, for me, in business in Boise and the Treasure Valley, we're always working with Republican investors and business managers. And what you have to do in most of those cases is find common ground and work for common sense solutions. You have to build some trust by being willing to give a little and hear them on their issues and find the places where there is common ground for some of the things they're proposing. When you can give a little trust, you get a little trust. And there's ways to work across the aisle in both camps with civil discourse and reasonable solutions to shared problems. Generally in Idaho, I think a lot of people on both sides of the aisle have similar needs at the family level and at the business level, and we're more aligned than we are not.
Very good. David?
Actually, where I disagree, I think in our environment, partisanship is a myth, and it's something that we've been chasing for years as we have traded off progressive agendas and progressive ideas. I think that when Ben spoke about giving a little to get a little, it seems that we give, but we never get anything in return. And we've seen it over and over and over again that it's if we give a little, we'll get. So I think the only thing that we can do is secure a majority in the Senate and in the House so that we can continue to push through progressive legislation, which will benefit the people. And then when the people see something actually being accomplished for them, they'll be even more encouraged to vote for those who are making their lives better. And then the other side will have to come to the table in good faith, because they'll see that if they don't come to the table in good faith, they're going to be replaced. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last question, or excuse me, no, not the last question in this section. David, which current Republican senator do you most admire? And can you tell us why?
I had to think long and hard to actually think of someone. And honestly, I would have to go with Mitt Romney, and only because out of all of the Republican senators, he's the only one that I have seen in recent years who has shown any type of spine for standing up for his party. He does have the advantage that in his state, he's actually more popular than the former president, which gives him an advantage over some of the other candidates that might, some of the other senators. But he did twice vote to impeach and to convict Trump. And so I feel he's one Republican senator who is willing to, when it really matters to him, at least, or when it really matters to us all, he's willing to put people and what's right over party. So I would have to say Mitt.
And Ben, for you?
Yeah, as a short side story, I would like to say our former senator from Idaho back in the early 1900s, William Borah, as I've spent a lot of time in the backcountry and been on top of Mount Borah a number of times and backcountry skied off the backside of it, always is dear to my heart. But on a more current level, I'll say Lisa Murkowski. She voted to impeach the ex-president for attempting to overthrow a free and fair election. She has also shown the courage and independence to vote to confirm the exceptionally qualified Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court. And I'm also impressed with her understanding of the value of public lands for resource management, recreation, and reconnecting to our environment. She understands the complexities between those three interests and the sometimes diametrically opposed interests. She's also very receptive to her constituents and works to put people before politics.
Very good, thank you. And finally, staying on this topic, David, or excuse me, Ben, which senator of either party currently serving would you consider a political or ideological role model, and why?
Yeah, it's another tough one. I just finished John Lewis's book, Across That Bridge, and if he was still with us, I would say him in a heartbeat. But for now, another key player for me is Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois. She would have to be my choice in this case. She was a combat helicopter pilot when she was shot down by a rocket-propelled grenade in 2004. She lost both of her legs and had partial use of one arm in that incident. It took her over a year to recover, from what I understand, and during that time, she became a tireless advocate for fellow veterans. From there, she kept ascending, first to the House of Representatives, and then in 2017 to the Senate. She is a strong advocate for families, for middle-class income earners, and members of the military. She is a force of nature. I have the greatest admiration for her.
Thank you. And David?
This was also a tough one for me, but I'd have to say Senator Elizabeth Warren. And my reason was looking at all she's done even before she was a senator with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, where she actually put some things into motion and things in place where she really stood up for consumers in a meaningful way. She created rules and protections that kept people from being taken advantage of by collections agencies, credit card companies, mortgage companies. And I think this is an example of looking at real ways to solve the real problems that are facing us all here every day. And so in vein of my always looking for real solutions to real problems, I think she's definitely a senator who has delivered on some of those real solutions to those real problems. So I would have to say Elizabeth Warren.
Thank you. Now, the victor of this campaign in the Idaho Democratic primary is going to be facing Mike Crapo. So the next few questions will be about the sitting senator. So incumbent Senator Mike Crapo is finishing his fourth 6-year term as a U.S. Senator, and he previously served 3 2-year terms in the U.S. House of Representatives for a total of 30 years in Congress. What would you consider his most significant accomplishment in office? And David, we'll start with you.
Well, honestly, I think his most significant accomplishment in office would be staying in office that long, managing to get elected that many times, without actually delivering anything meaningful for the state of Idaho. Even a clock with a dead battery is wrong twice a day. So it seems to me that the greatest accomplishment is that he has managed to continue to return to Washington, D.C. year after year while refusing to listen to or deliver anything of value or significant to his constituents right here in Idaho. So that's as close as I can come to an accomplishment for Senator Mike Crapo.
Thank you. And Ben?
Yeah, given how much I value public lands and the access to the wild country, I would say Senator Crapo's most significant accomplishment was the Owyhee Initiative, which he sponsored. Senator Crapo brought together a diverse group of land users to protect over 500,000 acres of wilderness and 316 miles of national wild and scenic rivers. It's a beautiful area of the state. If you're new to the state, you'll spend time there soon, I hope. And this is all while he was building a long-term plan to preserve the livestock grazing in Owyhee County for, again, mixed interests. And I appreciate that he was able to bring those groups together. We now need him to stand up with Representative Mike Simpson's proposal to remove the lower 4 Snake River dams and help save Idaho's wild salmon.
Thank you. And Ben, what would you consider Senator Crapo's biggest failure in office?
My oldest son lost multiple friends during his late teens, all from the opioid epidemic and the lethal nature of fentanyl. It's a very emotional and very close to my heart experience that has hit a lot of different communities throughout this state. Senator Crapo has failed to protect Idaho communities from the opioid epidemic, while his political aspirations have been funded in no small part by big pharmaceutical companies. We need our elected officials to stand up to corporate lobbyists and the corporate profit machine that is currently buying favors from our elected officials and running Washington purely for their shareholders' financial gain. Idahoans deserve to be protected from the negative impacts of overly prescribed medications and the very dangerous legal drug market that is being pushed by big pharmaceutical companies. Crapo has failed us on those fronts.
Thank you. And David?
So yes, Mike Crapo does continue to fail us on the drug and opioid epidemic front. Like I said, I work in that industry and I see it firsthand. I was shocked to see that Senator Crapo voted against expanding the funding for the DFC program, the Drug-Free Communities program, which has been proven to reduce drug use among youth in our communities. I also see that in all of this time, Crapo, he doesn't bring any big investment to Idaho. When this past year in the omnibus legislation bill, Southeast Idaho Congressional District 2 actually received quite a few things: $500 million for INL research, $3 million for affordable housing, $7 million for fire stations in rural areas, hundreds of thousands of dollars for community college. Crapo voted against all of that. And in fact, no other area of the state got any money from that bill specifically earmarked, because no other senators or representatives would stand up and ask for it.
Thank you. And 30 years is a long time for someone to serve in Washington. Do you think U.S. senators and representatives should be subject to term limits, and why or why not? And if your answer is yes, what should those term limits be? David?
Absolutely, I think we should have term limits. I think 2 terms for a senator, which is 12 years, should be sufficient. I think before that, 3 terms as a representative, which would be 6 years. That kind of goes right along in line with the 2 terms as president of 8 years. So that gives you a long opportunity to develop your political chops, so to speak, and work your way through the process. But it also ensures that we don't end up with, it's almost similar to a monopoly. The longer these people are in office, the more difficult it is to get them out of office, the more resources they have, the more donors they have, the more large corporations they have. And so if we don't have rules in place that say, at a certain point, you're just done, they will always be beholden to that. And it just makes it that much harder to actually have them focused on our needs.
Thank you. Ben?
And yes, I agree with David. Elected representatives serving in the legislative branch of our federal government should be limited to no more than 18 years combined term public service limits. I would allow those a little bit different than David and propose legislation to that effect, where it's 18 years combined. If you're someone who's going to focus in the Senate or someone's going to focus in the House, it would be a mix and match of those, but you could not run for office after having served 18 years total. That would create a system of government that promotes mentoring and collaboration, rather than politicians spending their time raising money, campaigning for the next election cycle, holding on to power and not working towards good and responsible governance. So similar to David, this needs to happen. We need new and younger people in office, and we need a better socioeconomic demographic of elected officials for the benefit of all Americans.
Thank you. We're going to change the topic now, moving on to the housing crisis. And Ben, you will answer first. Home buyers are facing a double whammy of higher prices and higher mortgages, higher mortgage rates, which reduce the amount of money that they can borrow. What can Congress do to reduce the big gap between the cost of a new house and the amount an average two-earner household can borrow to buy it?
Yes, well, we need to pass federal tax policy that focuses the majority of the tax benefits to the middle-income Americans. Republicans' current approach to federal tax policy only benefits the wealthiest Americans and the largest corporations. So hardworking people of Idaho need elected officials dedicated to putting more money into more people's hands, which is better for all local business. And rather than continue to be beguiled by the Republicans' failing trickle-down economic theory. This has created an economic meltdown with booming individual and national debt, and it's the leading cause of inflation. So the solutions for homeowners is we've got to have a living wage that adjusts directly with inflation so the homeowners can afford it. And I'd like to create a program with a rent to own for apartment complexes that allow people to build some wealth so they would have an opportunity to have a larger down payment when they become homeowners.
Thank you. And David?
So there are lots of different ways that the Senate could get involved. They could fund different housing initiatives throughout the country. I believe there are some tax things that could be done. I know when I purchased my first home, I took advantage of the $8,000 first-time homebuyer tax credit, which made it easier for me to purchase my first home. Honestly, what we have with housing right now is a lot of a supply issue. And unfortunately, as mortgage rates do go up, that will slow the demand for housing a little bit, which may cause those prices. Here in Idaho, we're seeing double-digit gains in prices. It may cause that to sort of go off a little bit or slow down a bit. But really, the biggest thing that we can do in the Senate is change the way that other expenses are paid. We can reduce the cost of healthcare. We can pass laws requiring a livable wage. And so I think rather than focusing on how do we make housing cheaper, we need to figure out how do we put more money through taxes and better wages and cheaper healthcare into the average American family's pocket.
Thank you. So we're moving on now to the judiciary. The U.S. Senate recently confirmed Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson as the first Black female Supreme Court justice. After the confirmation vote, while Judge Jackson received a standing ovation, many Republican senators walked out of the Senate chamber. Senator Crapo, who voted against confirming Judge Jackson, was among those who walked out. Do you have a comment on Senator Crapo's action, and would you have voted to confirm now Justice Jackson? And I'll start with David.
Absolutely voted to Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. And as far as my comment on Crapo's actions, I think they were horrible. It was disrespectful to the Supreme Court. It was disrespectful to his colleagues in Congress and the Senate, disrespectful to the president, disrespectful to the people of Idaho, to America, and absolutely disrespectful to the people of Idaho. He represents us. So in the eyes of the world, Idaho walked out of that room when she was confirmed. And that's simply wrong. When you are representing the people, you have to represent the people. And we should have stayed there and had a certain level of decorum. And sometimes you have to do things you're not happy with doing, but you have to do them because it's the right thing to do. So I absolutely would have confirmed her, and I absolutely would not have walked out.
Thank you. Ben?
Yes, and in representing Idaho and Senator Crapo's choice, I'm with David. It was appalling that he would do such a thing. She was one of the most highly qualified Supreme Court nominees we've had in a very, very long time. I absolutely would have voted to confirm her. And she was the most qualified on both sides of the aisle. And so I'm very disappointed, as David is, for the disdain and disrespect he showed to the institution of both the U.S. Senate, being an elected official and representative of Idaho constituents, and to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's the kind of behavior we've come to expect from people who've been in Washington too long and who are shored up and think that they're going to easily win this next election. We're going to change that, and we're going to send him home so he can enjoy Idaho.
Thank you. And Ben, one of the most important duties of a U.S. Senator is to give advice and consent on judicial appointees. Federal District Judge B. Lynn Windmill announced in January of last year that he would be taking senior status in August, allowing President Biden to appoint a new federal judge. In March of 2021, Idaho's top Democratic elected officials submitted an all-female list of 4 recommended nominees to the White House, but there has been no action on those nominees. Many observers believe Senator Crapo and Risch have stonewalled the appointment process. How do you explain the delay, and do you think the delay is warranted?
I can't explain the delay, nor should the American people accept it. I can tell you that the nominees were very well qualified. State House Minority Leader called the nominees superb. This is how our trust in government gets eroded and people become apathetic and disenfranchised about government and or voting. Between Senator Crapo and Risch, they have been in the U.S. Senate for 36 years combined, and they have decided to slow this process but won't give us any reason for the delay. Idahoans deserve and are owed a better explanation. I'm not a Washington insider. They are. I suppose that's a good question for them.
Thank you. David?
Yes, I mean, like Ben, I can't really speak to their motivations. I can say, based on the statements they released about the recent Supreme Court nominations, one can only assume that because these names were proposed by Democrats, they won't be considered. So I don't think that as long as Crapo and Risch are in office, the American people or the people in Idaho should expect that process to move forward. We need to change that. That is not warranted. Justice is supposed to be swift. We need to have swift and fair and efficient. We need to have these processes moving in place. We need to get people in place. We are already looking at huge backlogs in our federal court system anyway. We don't have time to delay appointing these important justices or judges.
Thank you. Let's move on to elections and government integrity. And David, we will start with you. What steps can the U.S. Senate take to preserve free and fair elections and to ensure the right of every citizen to have their vote counted?
Absolutely. We've introduced, or there's been legislation introduced, the John Wrights Voting Act, the Protecting Democracy Act, that would make it so that it was harder for states to put, or nearly impossible for states to put restrictions in place on voting. We need to get rid of the filibuster so that we can pass those acts and that legislation. And we need to protect voting rights at the federal level so that we can ensure free and fair access to the ballot box for everyone. It is the most powerful tool that we have as Americans to protect our country, and we cannot be denying access to it. So that's the first thing that we could do, is pass those acts and allow more access to voting so that everybody across the country has their say in the elections.
Thank you. And Ben?
Yes, the right to vote is the cornerstone of a great democracy, and we should encourage the participation of all Americans. We've got to find a way to engage and motivate the youth and the folks that aren't engaged in the voting process right now, as well as make sure to protect those who are seeking to be engaged voters. The first thing the U.S. Senate could do is pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. That bill would restore the protections found in the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which has been eroded by the Supreme Court, leading to a litany of responsive voting restrictions and laws making it more difficult to vote. With David, I agree that voting access is paramount to what the federal government's role should be, and to continue this democratic and great democracy.
Very good. Thank you. We're going to move on to foreign affairs. In March of this year, the Senate passed a $1.5 trillion appropriations package that included $13.6 billion in emergency humanitarian and military aid for Ukraine amid the ongoing Russian invasion. The measure had bipartisan support, but one of those voting against the bill was Senator Crapo. Would you have voted for or against this legislation? And we'll start with Ben.
I absolutely would have voted for that bill. We have a vital partner in that region who are fighting for their existence. I also support the $33 billion package that is working through Congress right now to provide more aid to Ukraine. We cannot get in direct combat with our personnel. We don't want a hot war with Russia, but we cannot turn our back on Ukraine. The best way to thread that needle is to keep a steady supply of military, medical, and humanitarian aid to the battered country. This country did not provoke the violence and destruction that's been happening to them over the last several weeks. I would use this time to also strengthen NATO, but I see that question may be coming up.
Very good. Thank you. David, would you like to respond?
Yes, of course. I absolutely would have supported the bill, and I support the aid to Ukraine, and I do believe that we need to be doing more. In addition to the aid for Ukraine that was in that bill, there was billions and billions of other dollars for programs across this country that are desperately needed right here at home as well. And whether or not the foreign aid was in there, I believe Crapo should have voted for it. And I'm disappointed that he didn't. And so I'd like to see more aid for Ukraine. In addition, with what they're facing over there and the level of destruction and the carnage, where Russia just seems to have no interest in protecting civilians or following any of the traditional conventions of war, they're going to need massive amounts of humanitarian aid and military aid. And as Ben said, getting into a hot war would be difficult. So we need to be doing everything else that we can just short of that.
Thank you. We're going to move on now to the environment. In 2017, Senator Crapo was one of 22 senators who wrote to President Trump, urging him to withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Accord, and President Trump took this advice. Then on day one of his presidency, President Biden brought the United States back into the Global Climate Accord, and his spending proposal for the next year contains almost $45 billion to deal with global warming. It's a two-part question, and David, we'll start with you. How critical is it for the U.S. to address global warming? In your opinion, is the Biden-Harris administration too assertive on this issue, or is it not doing enough?
Well, I like water, so I think that it's extremely important that we're back in the climate accord. We're facing a mega drought in the Western United States and actually all across the world. Climate change is happening, and there's nothing that can be done to deny it. So we absolutely need to be back into that accord. And when we're facing the fact that Lake Mead and Lake Powell are so low, they're not sure they'll be able to provide water or hydroelectric power, I think that we can only assume that whatever we are doing, it is simply not enough. So I feel that very strongly that any measure that we undertake, we need to be looking at how can we do more, because we have let this go for so long. We need to work quickly and aggressively to try to shore up our resources and reverse this climate change catastrophe that is befallen us.
Thank you. Ben?
Yet it is way past time to address global warming. It is now incumbent that we prepare for a world that's resilient in adapting to a warming planet, and that we ensure that policies are in place to drastically curb emissions and prepare for extreme temperatures and depleted resources. America has some of the most brilliant, innovative people in the world. We need to work with them to encourage innovation, transformative innovation, that has the ability to bring us together in collaboration with other world leaders to prepare for climate disruptions.
Thank you. And I'm going to go back to both of you now with a follow-up question, because I don't know that I heard answers on if the Biden-Harris administration has been too assertive on this issue or if it's not doing enough. So David, I'll start with you.
No, I don't believe that they are being too assertive. In fact, as I said, I don't believe that we are doing enough. I think that we can do more. We can have more investments in renewable energy. We can have more investments in small modular reactors and other technologies that will help us curb the carbon emissions. I think that right now the Biden administration is hampered by the fact that they don't have strong majorities in either the House or the Senate. So anything that they propose is going to face an uphill battle to get anything done. So until we can create a stronger margin in both the House and the Senate, we're going to be extremely hampered as to what we can and actually accomplish.
Thank you. And Ben?
Yeah, and I agree. I think that the Biden-Harris administration could be doing a lot more. I would like to see infrastructure spending for renewable energy sources at both the rural and urban level, that we could be working on public transit systems that are based on renewable energy. We could be working on various solutions to kind of the multifaceted problem that we see in the West here, where every summer there's a lot more smoke in the air. So it's like we don't really need to deal with addressing whether science is telling us this is happening. We can just look up in the summer and realize that climate change is happening. And the multifaceted aspect of that is that we need to work with the management of thinning our forests and then supporting our firefighters that are out there in the field protecting our communities from the ravages and damages of brush and forest fires.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to immigration, and we'll start with Ben. Should there be a pathway to citizenship for undocumented individuals? If not, why not? And if yes, what should that pathway look like?
Yeah, we need, as American citizens, to, and I believe it's a duty and our solemn responsibility to embrace comprehensive immigration reform. Especially in Idaho, we owe it to our ever-growing Latino community that continues to be the workforce behind many of our rural and urban economies. I support the effort to pass the Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals, DACA, so that immigrants can come to this country as children may stay here. Receiving education, establishing a streamlined path to citizenship, and provide for their families in a dignified way. I would propose a simple 3 to 5 year federal tax rate for these families with minimal Social Security safety net or social safety nets that allow immigrant families the rights and dignity for lawful and earned U.S. citizenship.
Very good. Thank you. And David?
I absolutely support immigration reform, and especially for the people that are already here. Idaho alone has over 3,500 DACA recipients who contribute over $150 million a year to the Idaho economy. And I think that the best way to do this would be to adopt the Biden, it's called the U.S. Citizenship 2021, that's through Congress. This would provide citizenship for DACA recipients, as well as create a path to citizenship for the undocumented workers already here, which our economies, especially our labor-based economies and agriculture, absolutely depend on. We know, even according to the farming institutions, that if we focus more on enforcement without reforming immigration, that we'll see significant increases in costs at the grocery stores when we're already battling inflation. We can't afford any more increases in costs. So absolutely, we owe it to these people. It's been 10 years for DACA. Let's make them citizens now.
Thank you. And our next topic is guns. And David, we will go to you next. Every year, more than 40,000 Americans are killed in acts of violence, and approximately 85,000 more are shot and wounded. What actions, if any, would you take to reduce the incidence of gun violence in our country?
First thing I would do is we need universal background checks, and we need to close the gun show loophole. It's critical that everybody who's purchasing a gun needs to go through the legal channels to do it. Second, we need to look at what the root causes of gun violence are. I believe that we have a mental health access and crisis issue in this country, and that if we want to truly address the amount of violence that we have, we need to look at the root causes. So that would be mental health and poverty. So if we could address the mental health access to give more access and more availability, especially in rural areas where these individuals are having crises, they're having mental breaks, and then they're going around and shooting people, we could avoid a lot of that if we could catch that earlier on. And then if we look at poverty areas, if we could work to develop those neighborhoods and reduce the level of poverty and lift them out of poverty, I think we would see a decrease in violent gun crime.
Thank you. And Ben?
Yeah, when I was 15 on my own, I loaded up 2 horses, drove to the mountains near Stanley, horse-packed 10 miles into the backcountry where I spent the next 10 days elk hunting alone. As a gun owner, I grew up hunting on the public lands of Idaho in the rugged backcountry. So I'm committed to private gun ownership rights and maintaining those rights of the Second Amendment. And at the same time, as a father and educator to our community members, I've taught multiple groups of youth about gun safety and responsible gun handling and ownership. I would support measures for limiting access to guns for those with mental health concerns, and stronger measures for protecting our children so that they are and feel safe in our school system. I would support initiatives to curtail ghost gun transactions, better vetting with more thorough background checks, and the registering of any military-grade firearm, similar to how the U.S. military issues firearms to its service members.
Thank you. And our last few questions are going to talk about political considerations. We'll start with you, Ben. As of 1 month ago, Senator Crapo reported having $6 million in his campaign bank account. How do you plan to compete with the incumbent's enormous financial advantage?
Well, I plan to have and share better ideas on leadership and good governance than he's been able to provide to the people of Idaho. I plan on motivating the youth to get involved, and by reaching across party lines, engaging with reasonable Republicans and business colleagues who want to return to civil discourse and to create a working government that builds a strong middle class. And I also hope to get all of your support and the great Democratic folks of Idaho in raising the funds necessary to be successful to unseat Senator Crapo.
Thank you. David?
Yes, I will be doing the way that I will be looking at this the way the Democrats have been winning races for years and years and years. Most of our donations, in fact, most of the donations to my campaign are small donations, $25, $100 donations. And what happens is these people are extremely dedicated and they're willing to get out and do the work. We knock on doors, we make phone calls, we have that direct voter contact that you can't buy when you have $6 million. You can't replace the dedication of the people who are supporting campaigns like mine. We have volunteers all across the state right now who, as we speak, well, they're probably watching right now, but normally are texting and phone calling and reaching out to their friends and neighbors. We're creating that visibility, and we're reaching out to those groups that, while people have been chasing the moderate Republicans, we often leave behind, such as the Latinos, the LGBT population, and we're engaging those groups once again in our campaign.
Thank you. In Citizens United, the Supreme Court deregulated limits on independent expenditure group spending for or against specific candidates and allowed corporations to spend unlimited funds on campaign advertising if they're not formally coordinating with a candidate or political party. David, what is your position on Citizens United?
It needs to be overturned, absolutely, right now, immediately. This large amounts of money coming into politics is one of the things that has made it more difficult to have your average Americans get into governance. The only role that money plays in politics is ensuring that only the wealthy, elite, and privileged ever make it to that governing class. And so by removing Citizens United and bringing it much back down to where, in order for candidates to raise the money to run their campaigns, they have to go back to that direct voter contact. I think that A, will see more people being able to access and become politicians and work to govern. And B, we'll be able to see more contact between those politicians and their constituents, because they'll now be dependent on those constituents for the funds they need to run their campaigns.
Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, I'm with David. We would repeal that. It's a corporation should not be treated as individuals and should not be able to buy the politicians that serve their interests. My late father helped write the Sunshine Law back in the early 1970s that is still the guiding law in Idaho that makes campaign contributions and finance transparent. Voters deserve to know who's paying their to elect their representatives. I will work with other elected officials to move away from private funded political campaigns, give more people from more socioeconomic and diverse backgrounds the opportunity to be in public service as an elected representative.
Thank you. And Ben, many observers believe a Democrat can't be elected to federal office in Idaho because it's such a heavily Republican state. What do you say to those who believe that a Democrat can't win?
Well, I intend to conquer the divide, not the other side. I believe there are many disillusioned and disenfranchised Republicans throughout the state that are looking for a fiscally responsible, socially kind-hearted, and well-prepared leader who will restore decency to our democracy. And besides, I think everybody loves rooting for the underdog.
Very good. And David?
I think that there's a large number of unaffiliated voters in this state. I also think that there's large groups such as the Hispanic population, where only about 7% of the Hispanic population actually votes in our elections. I think that often in our chasing of moderate Republican voters and our idea of wanting to reach across the aisle, we're selling out and selling short those disenfranchised groups, which makes them less likely to want to engage with us. So I have run my campaign about advocating for those and standing up for those groups and re-engaging them with the party, which I hope will create a stronger Democratic Party force in Idaho. And I hope that it will bring them to the voting booth to support our candidates, because they're going to support people who are reaching out to them and who support them. I don't believe we will ever achieve enough moderate Republican voters to change the elections. We've seen it here in Southeast Idaho over and over again. And we have some of the most extreme Republican legislators here. We can't shift enough. We have to change our tactic.
Very good. And so to that end, you spoke about trying to engage with marginalized communities. What else do you see as the future of the Democratic Party, both here in Idaho and nationally? And David, this is for you.
I think actually the wake-up call that we're seeing across this country right now is a huge indicator of what needs to happen. We need to get back to the issues that matter to people. A month ago, we hardly ever talked about abortion on the campaign trail. And in my last 2 days of phone calling with constituents, that's all we talk about. People care about the issues that affect them. And I think if we move ourselves back to real issues affecting real people and we deliver real solutions to those problems, I think that we will attract more voters back to our party. And so we have to focus more on delivering solutions and less focus on trying to appease the other side.
And Ben, same question to you.
Yes, the Democratic Party, both of Idaho and of the nation, I believe, is very strong and respected in how they view education. And it's been a hallmark of my family's ability to get out of poverty from my dad's side of the family, all the way through my life and my kids' life. I believe the Democratic Party has always been strong on environmental issues, climate change, and protecting of public lands. I think the key element for the Democratic Party is to find a way to embrace some fiscal responsibility and dedicate themselves to a federal tax policy that benefits the hardworking middle-income Americans.
Thank you. You are both debating tonight, and thank you so much for being here and giving voters an opportunity to learn more about you and understand your position on the issues. If you should win, you will be having an opportunity to potentially debate with Senator Mike Crapo. So if you do, what do you propose for a debate with the senator? And Ben, we'll start with you.
Well, pretty simple. There are so many topics of serious interest and concern. I would propose to have as many in-person debates as he's willing to have and willing to come back to Idaho to share the stage with me.
Very good. And David?
I like how you had to put so many qualifiers in on the question, because I think that the real question is, will he debate with us or will he engage with us? And really, that's not something that we can control. I would do the same thing that I've done throughout this entire campaign. I know we were all disappointed with the Idaho Public Television debates, but all we can do as candidates is make ourselves available, indicate our willingness to participate, and I would be willing to participate with Mike Crapo in any debate that he's willing to have with me, whether it's Zoom, in person, over the phone, carpool karaoke, whatever we could do to get him to actually engage with the Idaho voters. I would be more than willing to meet him wherever he wanted to go. I'll go to Washington, D.C. to debate him, wherever he would like to go.
Very good. Thank you. It's a good thing this is the last question because I just choked a little bit. So if you are not the Democratic nominee, will you commit to supporting your primary opponent in the general election? And David, I'll start with you.
Absolutely. I think as Democrats, you know, it's nice to have a contested primary. We don't have that many in the state of Idaho. In fact, by all accounts, other than the governor's race situation, we are the only contested primary other than a couple of county races. So I think it's great to have that. It brings some attention. But at the end of the day, on May 18th, I'm going to wake up and support whoever's name is going to be on that general election ballot, because the most important thing is that we not only maintain our Senate majority, but that we expand our Senate majority.
Thank you. And Ben, go ahead.
Yes, I agree with David on expanding the Senate majority. It's critical for Americans, critical for all Idahoans. And when I first met David, I liked him. And I told him and committed to him at that time and maintained that yes, whoever comes out of this Democratic primary, I will support.
Thank you. Well, that was our last question, and it brings us now to our closing comments. So we've got 2 minutes on the clock, and Ben, I think you are going to go first, and David will wrap us up. So Ben, please go ahead with your closing comments.
Yeah, and I want to thank you, Michelle, and everybody involved in making this debate happen, including David and Idaho Democratic Party, and then the Idaho Women for Biden-Harris. It's a great honor, and I appreciate all of your time. I want to thank all who are listening and who have zoomed in with us on this evening for your time and your commitment to the Democratic Party and your attention to the Democratic candidates that are in this race. We have a lot of good candidates down ticket in the districts and at other statewide races that I encourage you to also get behind and support. I'm sure you're engaged and involved where your time allows. This is a unique evening because you, the voters, had an opportunity to hear two candidates' views on a variety of topics. Meanwhile, we're running against a man who spends most of his time in Washington, D.C., more than he does in Idaho, and very rarely offers an opportunity for voters to hear what he has to say. I'm guessing it's because he really doesn't care, but I do care. My family has been here for 5 generations, and I've spent my whole life here. I know the Idaho way, and I know Idahoans don't trust career politicians. That's why I'm offering you this opportunity. Do you want another 6 years of being ignored by a senator, or do you want somebody who connects to you and wants to fight for you? Somebody who knows Idaho, somebody who's been here and knows the backcountry. I believe it answers itself. So join me. I think it's pretty clear. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but no great success is easy. No great victories without its challenges. I'm ready to put in the time, sweat, and energy to become your next United States Senator. I'm Ben Persley, and I'm asking you for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. And David, you can round us out with your closing comments tonight.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I really appreciate it. You've made this whole process very smooth. I'd like to thank, of course, the Idaho Women for Biden and the Idaho Democratic Party, but I'd also like to thank 2 women without which this debate would not have happened, and that's Betty Richardson and Cassie Cerami. I first met Cassie during the Biden election, and I've always been impressed. And so I want to thank those 2 women, especially for reaching out and really driving this debate to make sure that we had this opportunity. Of course, I'd like to thank the voters for paying attention tonight and sticking with us. I think we're actually going to end on time. And of course, Ben as well. We didn't get to cover every issue that people are asking about. I know that I'm talking to voters every single day who are asking about questions that we didn't cover tonight. So I would certainly encourage any voters who have questions to visit my website, rothforidaho.org. That's ROTHFORIDAHO.org. So I guess we all know how to spell Idaho. Anyway, in addition to that, I think it's also important to look at those voter guides that are out there. That's another great way to compare. And the League of Women Voters has been informing voters since 1920. So I would encourage you to check out vote411.org and compare our answers there. Compare us in the Idaho Statesman. Look at all of the options that are available to you, because you need to pick the candidate that you think is going to best represent you and best look for those real solutions to the real problems that the real people here in Idaho face. I'm David Roth. I'm running to represent you in the United States Senate. I would very much appreciate your vote on May 17th. And I'd also just like to have one quick shout out and thank you to all of the volunteers who are working across the state on my campaign right now, helping us to get the word out. So thank you very much. And everybody, I hope you have a wonderful evening and good rest of your night.
Thank you very much. Thanks to both of the candidates. And I also want to extend a thank you to Betty and to Cassie for extending me this honor to get to be with you to help all of the viewers tonight and who might be watching the replay learn a little bit more about the candidates who are running in this race so they can make an informed decision. Thank you for the investment of your time. The Idaho Women for Biden-Harris have been pleased to host this forum. We want to express our appreciation to the Idaho Democratic Party for the logistical support and to thank the candidates for the spirited and informative debate. If you know anyone who could not join us live tonight, a recording will be available on the Idaho Democratic Party website early next week. Now, we also want to thank all those who submitted questions and everyone who joined our Zoom debate this evening. I would like to remind everyone that anyone, regardless of party registration, can vote in the Democratic primary. And remember to vote. Good night, and thanks for joining us.